Okay, I've been thinking a lot about selfhood lately. Selfhood as experience, as a sense of identity, of an individual experience, of experience persisting over time. Talking to those around me reveals that there's a wide variety in how people experience selfhood. It's difficult to put these differences into words a lot of the time because it's very useful to have the concept of self and everyone as an individual self. It's very useful to differentiate between the internal and the external world and between different people persisting in that world. So of course, all of our language is kind of built on the foundation, the idea of individuals being fully separate from each other and having a continual sense of self that persists natively within them throughout their life. This video is an attempt for me to get a better sense of how I experience selfhood. And it will likely not line up with your experience of selfhood. The idea of two identical experiences of self seems unlikely. Certainly there's similarities, there's broad similarities across most people, I would say. However, there's always going to be differences, and those differences may be foundational to your experience, to your sense of identity. So this is just how I believe I experience self. And of course I can relate that to no one else's experience except for how they translate it into words and how I interpret those words. So it makes the whole idea of analyzing differences in sense of self a little difficult. So this is a reflection inwards to my experience, and I hope that by putting it out there, it will resonate with people on some level, or people will be able to point out clear delineations between my experience and their experience. Firstly, I'd like to make clear the separation that I feel between self and experience. Self seems to be some kind of narrative force, an interpersonal relation, and fundamentally reactive in how it is formed and how it acts. What I mean by that is that self is formed out of experience. There's nothing native to it. It's a tapestry, an interweaving of a lot of different strands that eventually form this kind of overarching narrative. And in contrast to that, I find there to be another thing, a kind of more native experience, where everything is kind of immanent, immediately accessible, and feels like it exists on the same field of awareness. This experience is also fundamentally unbounded. There's very little separation between me as a single entity and those things around me with which I'm able to interact and operate. In this way, experience is a creative force. It allows for the ability to take everything around you and relate it back to each other in different ways and fully engage in the world around you and the environment around you. It doesn't limit you to a single persisting identity, or at least how other people perceive that identity. It's a truly free-flowing phenomena when you're able to engage fully with everything else around you and be part of it, and there be very little separation between you as people conceive you, as people talk about you, and the world. Going back to the idea of a narrative self, taking a closer look at it, I think it's clear that this is constructed. Whether or not it's experienced as such, whether or not people have a sense of self, which we will get to in a second, it's fundamentally made up of component parts, of experiences, of ways of interacting and thinking about the world. It's shaped and formed by smaller components. And these components work together to build this kind of narrative, this kind of constructed identity. Now, with this constructed identity, I think I have pretty solid self-knowledge. It may not be perfect. I'm certainly not aware of all of the things that influence my behavior or influence my identity. However, I'm able to introspect in such a way that it feels easy to pull these different strands apart and see where things stop or where things influence other things, where forces collide and create some new component. And this is what I call self-knowledge. I'm able to introspect at a high enough level to look at the different forces interacting to create new things, to create new moments of self, to create new capacities in which I then embody. But there's a level of separation here. I'm looking at the self, looking at the narrative, the constructed self, from somewhat of an outside perspective, as I would take a cool rock or something like that and look at the smaller facets of it. In the case of self-knowledge, introspection, I'm kind of removing my experience from a narrative sensation and creating a separation between those two. And this doesn't take much work to separate these two components, to separate experience from the constructed self. I think that feels much more natural to me than what other people describe, a kind of sense of self, of being unified in that way between your experience and your self. This kind of full embodiment of experience within this identity, within this narrative, within this construction. A lot of people describe this. A lot of people that I've had conversations with about how they experience the self say that they have to take a step back and then take the self as an object, and as soon as they look at it, they then realize that it has many different drives and facets forming it. However, that's not their native understanding of self. And I believe that for me, having to align my sense of experience with this kind of narrative self is unnatural in some capacity. It feels a lot more natural to be, of course, influenced by this narrative self, to have those things operating on my experience, but there's nothing unified about them necessarily. So when I take a closer look at certain aspects of my narrative, that doesn't take a tremendous amount of work. Of course, it's separated in some capacity. It's different from other parts of myself. That feels intuitive. That feels immediately true to me. Whereas I think other people have to abstract their experience from the sense of self, and then they can take a closer look at it as a whole and take that whole and break it down into smaller elements. And this is the dichotomy that I'm forming between a sense of self and a knowledge of self. It's the difference between kind of an intuitive alignment with narrative self and the kind of raw duration experience of everything being unbounded and accessible. To give an example of this unboundedness, when I am alone, when I'm in my room, when I'm reading or doing homework or whatever, I don't have a persisting sense of self that these things relate back to. There's not a clear separation between the internal world and the external world. Everything kind of happens on a single plane. And of course, if I take a step back and say, am I the one creating experience? Then I will go, oh, of course, I'm the one experiencing. There is a one that is created by the material reality of my body and my brain, and that's creating the experience. But unless I take a step back and think about it, it feels like the world is equally as real as I am. There's no true separation there. Everything is fully accessible. You can take the senses of things and have those senses immediately impact you. And you, in turn, can produce senses in such a way to really influence the world around you. It's abstracted from the idea of self and other, of in-group and out-group. That's not something that I intuitively feel when I'm alone in a space. When I'm interacting with things just simply in my room, there's not a clear delineation between the internal and the external. However, as soon as I get into a social circumstance, or I'm talking with friends, or engaged in conversation, it feels almost like being trapped within this narrative self. The narrative construction that I'm diffusely aware of at all times, but have to work to unify, is now forced upon me. I'm now forced to integrate within that thing. People from the outside will only see me as that constructed self. The ways that I act, the things that I say, the way I express myself will immediately impact that person's perception of me. There is a very clear delineating line. When I'm alone, things are kind of infinitely connected. And when drives interact and collide in a novel way, then it's clear that drives are just colliding in a novel way. However, when I'm confronted with this idea of being a unity in which people interact with as other, this creates a demand for internal consistency. This creates a ground on which the narrative self must be fully unified, fully turned to one. It's a calcification of all of these different parts, creating a monolithic identity in which other people will perceive me as such. And this can be tremendously difficult to deal with. I'm talking here more abstractly, more ideologically difficult to deal with. I get along in social settings pretty well, I would say. I don't have real social anxiety or anything like that. However, when I take a step back and there's some contradiction between this sense of embodiment and this sense of kind of separation of a plane of immanence, then it is clear that these are two different ways of interacting with the world. And it's troubling to think that the way in which I experience the world will never truly be translated outside of me in such a way that other people will be able to look at and get a full picture of, a full idea of. And I'm sure other people have their own modes of experiencing similar to my own. But that's not how we interact in society. We interact as embodied individuals, as kind of a separation between self and world, and self and other. And this kind of artificial separation creates the need to present as a unity, as a fully encompassed singular identity. Even if we know that other people are made up of kind of a multiplicity, there still demands some idea, some conception of them as other, as a kind of unity. And importantly, a unity that can be broken down, but fundamentally is singular. And this, of course, differs from the idea of some unity that presents itself after a lot of different things have risen up in such a way to create some kind of integration. And to give an incredibly rough sketch about what I think is happening when all of these parts interact, I would say that the narrative constructed self is taking information from the world around it and integrating it into some kind of heuristic narrative. A narrative about how the world works, frameworks, ideas of how things interact. And of course, this narrative in turn influences how experience is felt. But this narrativization is also presented to the outside world, and that's a lot clearer of a line there. The narrative for experience is almost subconscious, whereas the narrative for external beings, other people, the separation between self and other is kind of explicit. It's rendered explicit in your action, in the ways that you are. And introspecting about the self, about the narrative self, taking experience and taking from that mode of being a look at this construction, you can certainly influence those narratives, influence those frameworks, the way that you think about and operate within the world. However, it can still be difficult to take those changes in the narrative and present it to the outside world. Those changes still have to be embodied in some capacity. And this, of course, still demands the unification, the monolithic idea of self, and presenting it in a new way. A kind of raw, immediate abstraction and introspection and change in narrative cannot be presented as clearly as it can to experience to the outside world. It's always going to be more difficult for other people to understand how you are changing at any given moment, every given moment, than it is for you to understand your changes in perception and interaction. This relates back to intuition insofar as you have an immediate sense of this. You have a grasp of what is happening, of the way that you are experiencing it at any given moment. This kind of raw abstraction and integration and interaction between all of these outside forces, that's what drives experience. That's what makes experience. And that's why it's so difficult to describe experience as a singular, all-encompassing phenomena. So clearly it can be difficult to separate the notion of a persistent internal state from the external world when everything is reiterating, when time is just being created repeatedly, when everything is kind of on a constant loop of recreation of itself. There's no lower medium of persisting experience that things get filtered through. This kind of raw experience is being created, being made in every single moment. And to diagram this in a more understandable way, I think it's fair to say that this kind of immediate experience is a relaxation, a kind of fully expanded immersive experience at top. And this is where mind space lives, when you're alone and relating to everything around you. However, as you move down the cone, you eventually reach the plane of selfhood. And this is a contraction of experience, a unification of all of these different elements in past and in current that are forming you. They now all have to be combined in some capacity to create the idea of individualism. And of course, from this idea of individualism, there's a clear opportunity for alienation to be created here. However, if you continue further down, if you don't just stop at the full constriction, if you try to relax a little bit more, then this allows for expanded engagement with other people around you, with meat space, with the real world. It is certainly not the same as raw experience. It's not going to be as unfiltered. There's going to be some selfhood that is creating how you interoperate within the external world. And it may require some level of putting on a mask and presenting in a way that may not be true to your raw experience of the situation. However, engaging in such a way allows for some relaxation of this alienation, of this like constricted sense of selfhood. You can now engage in becoming a little more rather than just being. And the tightening here is really a lot of being. It's real raw experience of the moment. Whereas on either side of the tube here, that operates a lot more on becoming, the understanding of how things relate and interoperate. And the ability to engage in social settings allows for the ability to understand how social dynamics are moving and flowing throughout the circumstance, throughout the situation. Your true expansive experience may have to be filtered, tightened, and re-expressed in some way. However, there's still some form, something like experience on the other side. There's still some kind of interrelation within meat space, rather than just like raw idea experience mind space. So if you feel equally alienated at the idea of a persisting monolithic selfhood, then engage a little more, try to relax a little more. And as soon as you do so, you will realize that although it is not the same, the things operate in a similar capacity. There's no difference between the sense of expanded experience up here and the sense of expanded engagement down here. There's difference in how it is felt, but fundamentally, metaphysically, things are operating in the same capacity, in the same ways. There's no change in relation, fundamental relation, when you're alone versus around other people. And this kind of relaxation, this ability to be in engagement rather than just experience, allows for some more opening up to the actual world around you, which is important. Pro-reality. Again, I'm pro-reality. Go like make some friends and know people around you. That's a positive thing for life. Of course, this will never fully replicate mind space, alone space, raw experience, but it is something close, and you have to interact with the real world. So do not get trapped in alienation. Do not get trapped, constricted in selfhood. Detention of this experience into something a little more broad, a little more open-ended will really lend itself to a positive experience in the end. So I don't know, once again, go outside and talk to people, I suppose. On a final couple of notes, I have shut down my Patreon because it got taken down twice from people trying to join, I'm pretty sure. So I am now using YouTube memberships. So do not go to the Patreon, do not subscribe there. The YouTube membership option should be like below this video, and will have everything that the Patreon had and more, I believe. I'm still in the process of uploading like custom emojis and custom badge icons and stuff, but I do like how connected it is to the platform. So there's a Discord available, and there's already one video up, one exclusive video up from last time from my Patreon days, and I will be uploading at least one more video pretty soon to the membership page. And finally, I don't usually mention books that I read because it sounds a little pretentious to like make a YouTube video about what you're thinking and then relate it back to some like actual philosophy. With that being said, I did borrow a tremendous amount and like outright copy one of the diagrams in this book. Of course, I recontextualized it to self rather than like memory and space and experience and duration and stuff. However, I would like to make it clear that I'm ripping off this book. If you cannot see it, it is Bergsonism by Gilles Deleuze. How do you say his name? Gilles Deleuze? What is it?
We are looking at how to pronounce this name as well as how to say more interesting and often mispronounced names. In French, it is actually said as Gilles.
So Bergsonism by Gilles Deleuze. I'll be uploading a video to my YouTube membership, going through some of the notes that I took, and doing like a brief overview, and also talking about the book I'm currently reading, and maybe do a like little bit of a book club or read along kind of thing there. So that'll be fun. If you're interested in that, then sign up below. Thank you again for all of the channel support, all the views and subscribers, and very engaged comments that I get. I love reading those. I'll especially read these comments. I would be very interested in hearing what people have to say about their experience of selfhood, as well as the money that I'm now making off of you guys paying me. That's awesome. That's super cool. The channel will hopefully be monetized pretty soon, so I'll start making money off of ads as well. So that's pretty sick, because I do love cash money. Big cash money fan here. So with that, I will see you soon. Thank you again for everything.